From my experience, I realized that there are two things that we need to be successful in this business. We need to have guts and we need to have knowledge. If you have guts and no knowledge, you'll just go make dumb purchases. If you have knowledge and you don't have the guts, then you're going to have that analysis paralysis thing where you just sit around analyzing every deal until somebody else buys it.
Welcome to the Rental Property Owner and Real Estate Investor Podcast, brought to you by the Rental Property Owner Association, providing benefits and services to real estate investors and rental property owners for over 48 years. With your host, Brian Hamrick from Hamrick Investment Group.
This episode is sponsored by Green Property Management, managing everything from single-family homes to apartment complexes in the West Michigan area. Find out more at greenpropertymgt.com. Hello and welcome to episode 205. My guest today has been investing in the Baltimore, Maryland area for the past 17 years, and he has over 100 rental units. Through real estate investing, Mark Owens was able to leave behind his full-time computer training business, and he hasn't had a W-2 job for over 10 years. Now, he dedicates himself to helping others invest in buy and hold rentals by providing education through investor meetups, classes, Facebook Live, and podcasts, such as this one. Mark, thanks for being on the show today.
Hey, thank you, Brian. You're absolutely welcome.
So I'd love to find out how you got started investing in real estate.
It started back, in the early 2000s. I was working in the IT field, and I was making a lot of money. For me. It was between 130 and 150 a year. And I was, I just kept saving and saving and saving, and I invested a lot in the stock market. And the stock market was going up, and I had this mistaken assumption that I knew what I was doing. And the stock market went down, and I lost everything that I'd made. And I hurried up and jumped out before I lost the money that I'd put in. So I was sitting there, and at the time I had saved up a good bit. I had maybe $130,000 to start, and I wasn't really sure what to do with it. I knew I didn't want to spend it. I knew I wanted to invest it. And I had an interest in buying rental properties several years prior to that. And I just, the thought occurred, like, maybe I should try buying a rental property. And my thought was, let's try it and maybe buy 10 rental properties. Because at the time, I was an independent consultant and my wife wasn't working. We had a small child at home. And, the thoughts were like, if I get hit by a car or get sick or something, if I'm not working, I don't get paid. I don't get any sick days or any of that stuff because I was an independent consultant. And so the original intent was to buy enough rentals where if something happened to me, I would make enough cash flow off the rentals to support like my basic needs, like my mortgage, my, gas and electric and food, just like the very basic stuff. And so that's how it got started. I bought my first property, and after, by the time I got like 10 of them, then my eyes kind of opened, and I thought, man, if I just keep buying these, then I'll eventually have enough where I don't have to work for anybody anymore. And that's kind of the short story.
So you just covered a lot of ground there. You bought one, and then all of a sudden you had 10 of them. Talk about that first one and some of the mistakes you made.
Yeah, the first one it's kind of how do I put this? The first one is the hardest one to buy because you've got this emotional issue, you've got the confidence issue. Oftentimes a lack of support. I didn't know any other landlords or anybody else that was doing it. So, I was really on my own 100%. So it was really scary. I was getting over that fear and just, doing as much homework as I can, reading books. There weren't any podcasts back then. In 2002, there was no Facebook. I don't even think I was using Google at that time. So I just, I just gathered up as much information as I could over like a 6-month period, looked at a bunch of houses. I put together an Excel spreadsheet to do the math for me. Where I could just fill in some blanks and then it would automatically calculate my cash on cash return. And, I finally found a property that fit the criteria that I was looking for. At the time, I was looking for a 30% minimum cash on cash return. And after 6 months, I finally identified a property that fit that criteria. And, I pulled the trigger on it. It was, the house, it was 3 apartments and a large garage that was rented out for $250 a month. And, I bought that property, and I hadn't made any mistakes with that property. Honestly, this sounds kind of funny, but like people ask me all the time, like, well, tell me about the mistakes you've made, and I can honestly say that I haven't made any mistakes. The reason I say that is because any decisions that I make are with the information that I have available at that time. And I make the best decision that I can based on the information I have available. Now, sometimes new information comes into the equation that was unexpected, and it turns out that maybe the decision that I made, didn't work out the way I'd planned. But I mean, that's life. That's not a mistake. To me, a mistake is when you have the information, you know what the best decision is, and then you make a different decision, that's contrary to what the information tells you. And then when stuff blows up, well, obviously, you made a mistake with that. I've been very deliberate and careful with my rental business as far as, purchases and stuff like that. If I've made any mistakes, it's probably been with, I would say, going with my gut or not going with my gut, where, a tenant fills out an application and everything looks good on paper and the references check out, but my gut just says, something doesn't feel right, and I can't put it into words what it is. I can't exactly explain it to somebody. And the times I haven't gone with my gut, a lot of times those are the tenants that turn out to be the problem tenants. And it's hard to quantify it. So I don't know if it's a mistake or not, but it's just, it's just one of those things that happen.
You brought up a couple of things there that I think are key. One is you talked about having your Excel spreadsheet that you put together where you could plug in the numbers and it would help you figure out that 30% cash-on-cash return. The Excel spreadsheet and the financial analysis portion is something that I found a lot of investors skip over. Like, they don't even run the numbers. So for your first one, why did you realize that was so important?
I'm a left brain numbers guy, rational, logical. That's the way I operate. And I was, how do I put this? When I was investing in the stock market, I was used to getting like a 20% return. And that, of course, anybody could get a 20% return when the market's like flying.
Was that during the tech bubble?
Yeah, that's the one. And, I made the mistake that a lot of real estate investors make, is I thought that I had some kind of skill, and I didn't have any skill. It was just dumb luck. The rising tide lifts all ships, and I was the little dinghy that got raised with everybody else. And, of course, when, the market crashed, I crashed with it, and I didn't want that to happen again. And I figured with the first rental, again, it's a big commitment. It's kind of scary, but my thoughts were, if I buy a property to rent out and I'm all in it for, $75,000, that's with the mortgage and the down payment and everything else, the worst thing that's going to happen is I'm going to hate the business. I'm going to sell it 1 or 2 or 3 years later and maybe lose $10,000. Like, that's the worst case. But the best case is, potentially a lifetime of, financial freedom, independence, creation of, this, people are calling it generational wealth now, creating the cash flow. And I knew that was possible. People, with the rental properties, the residential rental properties, which I prefer, people are always going to need a place to live. If you buy properties in the C neighborhoods, they're pretty much recession proof, because no matter how bad things are going, those people still need a place to live. And there's a lot more of those people. So I avoided investing in the A neighborhoods, or the B plus neighborhoods, because when the market goes down, the first thing that happens is the people that are renting those properties are looking for a cheaper place to live. And they moved the people in the A's moved to the B's, the people in the B's moved down to the C's, and the people in the C's are pretty much kind of stuck there unless they want to go to the D's, the D neighborhoods, which are the bad neighborhoods. So what I figured was, it's going to be a supply and demand thing. When the market, when the economy isn't doing that well, the people at the top are going to start to move down, and that's going to create a lot more pressure in the C neighborhoods, and the rents potentially could actually go up. And that was my experience when we had the 2007, 2008 crash, when several of my friends had invested in the A and B neighborhoods, and they were slashing their rents and, upside down in their mortgages, and my rents were actually going up. And so the way that I kind of figured it out held true for me in my environment. I'm only speaking about my local market where I invested in. Maybe the laws of economics don't apply in Memphis or San Francisco, but they certainly do where I'm at, and it definitely worked out.
So I want to go back also to what you said about never making mistakes, and I really like how you put that. You've always made the best decision based on the information you had at the time. But you also talk about how when things have gone wrong, sometimes your gut was telling you to make one decision, but it sounds like your head was telling you to make the opposite decision. How have you been able to address that?
That's a funny thing, and I've actually put together, I don't want to bore your listeners or bore you too much, but I'd like to take a couple minutes to explain it, because I think it's really important for people to understand this. If we think of our brain as like the iceberg, our conscious mind is, maybe 10%, like the 10% of the iceberg that's above the surface. Most of the iceberg is below the surface, and I think that most of our brain power is our subconscious mind that's operating. With our conscious mind, we get information from our eyes, our ears, our taste, the touch, the senses that we recognize. But our subconscious mind gets information and processes information that we're not even aware of. And the perfect example of that is this has happened to just about everybody I've ever talked to. You're sitting at a restaurant or somewhere, and you just get a feeling like somebody's looking at you. And you turn around, and there's somebody staring right at you. And like you knew it, you got that gut like something's going on, but you couldn't prove it. It wasn't logical, it wasn't rational, but nevertheless you know that feeling exists. You've had it. The phone rings, you know who it is, for you pick it up and you answer the phone, and it's the person you haven't talked to in 2 years, and you knew it was them. We have these senses that we can't explain, and it's part of our survival thing that's been going on for thousands and thousands of years. And now with this new modern society, we place much more emphasis on the things that we can see, the things that we can taste, the things that we can feel and touch and listen to. And we kind of ignore the more primal things like our feelings. And the thing is that ties this all together is our conscious mind thinks with words. Our subconscious mind doesn't think with words, it thinks with feelings. And so when that subconscious mind says, this isn't a good tenant, something doesn't feel right, that subconscious isn't able to communicate to our conscious mind in words. So it just sends a feeling to you. It says, this doesn't feel right. It's that gut feeling that we get. And we've all had that happen where we've walked away, things didn't turn out right, and we say, man, I should have went with my gut. Well, that's what your gut is. It's your subconscious mind that's collecting all this other information that you're not even aware of and processing it and sending you a signal like, yeah, this feels good, this doesn't feel good. It's sometimes it's hard for us to, how do I put this? It's hard for us to listen to that because our brain, is saying, well, look at on paper, the landlord checked out, the reference checked out, the pay stubs checked out. I called the utility company, they're paying their utility bills. Like on paper, everything looks perfect. But your gut is just telling you something else. It could be their mannerisms. It could be like their attitude, their failure to make eye contact with you. The job's all checked out and all. The landlord checked out. Well, maybe the landlord is given a good reference because he wants to kick the person out because they're terrible. So he'll lie to me just to get rid of his problem. Maybe the job, when I called, I got a good reference, and then maybe the person got fired the very next day, and I'm not aware of that, but maybe there's something with the mannerisms or the speaking or the tone of voice or the lack of eye contact that the tenant displays that my subconscious mind picks up on and says, man, something doesn't feel right.
Can you give us a real-life example from your real estate investing history of how you've either picked up on what your subconscious mind was doing and avoided an expensive mistake, or the inverse, actually made that mistake because you didn't listen to your gut?
Yeah, I'm dealing with it right now with a tenant right now that's in rent court where on paper everything looked good, the references checked out, everything was good, and his first month there, he's like, actually his second month there, he's already late with his rent, he's not answering the phone, and everything on paper looked perfect, and my gut said to me, man, you're going to probably regret this. And I did it anyway because the guy was just so damn nice, and I'm just, my nature is I want to give people the benefit of the doubt. And, but as far as like the business instinct, that's probably not the best decision to make. And I did it. I wanted to help the guy. I thought he was going to be a good fit. He was from the neighborhood. His mom lived across the street. And I think that some of those things probably subconsciously how do I put this? In my conscious mind, those things all sounded good and gave the guy more credibility and more strength on his application. But something in my gut was telling me, like, I think I'm going to regret this. And I ended up regretting it. It's just, so, I mean, it still happens, even though I'm aware of it and I try to pay attention to it. Those types of things still do happen.
I'd like to take a moment to tell you about Green Property Management. Not only do they manage everything from single-family homes to apartment complexes in the West Michigan area, they also manage my entire portfolio. So I can tell you from personal experience that their unique flat fee management style is worth a closer look. If you feel that your property isn't operating to its fullest potential, then Green Property Management can help you take a holistic approach that will save you money, eliminate your headaches, and increase your net income. And if you're a property manager interested in applying Green Property Management's model, give them a call at 1-866-95-GREEN or visit them on the web at greenpropertymgt.com. Yeah, really interesting. So apply that subconscious gut feeling to the first-time rental property buyer. Because as you know, it's a scary thing. You're dealing with the fears of making a mistake and losing money. But at the same time, you might have done all your numbers, had your Excel spreadsheet, and everything points to that green light. How can the first-time rental property buyer not make the mistake of thinking that it's their subconscious gut feeling, differentiating between that fear and what actually might be a real red flag?
Okay, I've recently just kind of been able to put this into words when I'm about to tell you that kind of summarizes that and kind of helps to break through that. From my experience, from myself and from watching countless other investors, grow in this business, I realized that there are two things that we need to be successful in this business. We need to have guts and we need to have knowledge. If you have guts and no knowledge, you'll just go make dumb purchases. If you have knowledge and you don't have the guts, then you're going to have that analysis paralysis thing where you just sit around analyzing every deal until somebody else buys it. You need to have both. The best way to get both is to start to surround yourself with people that are doing it, read books, listen to podcasts, watch YouTube videos, go to meetups, go to RIA meetings, start to get to know other people that are doing it that are successful. By doing that, you're going to gain some knowledge and comfort. When you have the knowledge and comfort, that's going to increase your, your guts to actually pull the trigger and buy your first rental property. I think that people today have it far easier than those of us that were buying properties 20 years ago because they have so many more resources available to them. For instance, like podcasts, like Bigger Pockets, like the local meetups and re-ups or RIA meetings where they can actually meet and network with other people. Maybe 6 months or a year before they buy their first property, they can start to talk to other people about what areas are good, what are bad, where do you find the contractors, which is probably the hardest part of the job, and what do you do if the tenant doesn't pay their rent, and all those different things. When you start to get the support from other people that are already doing it, that's going to make it a lot easier for people. I cannot underemphasize the importance of the networking in this business. To me, it's one of the most important things. That and doing what you say you're going to do, like just being a decent, honest person. If you're a bad guy, then people are going to find out, and you're going to have a really hard way to go. Your reputation is, your reputation and your time are your most important assets. And your network is right behind that. You're
absolutely right that investors today have access to a lot more information, a lot more free information. And there's also seems to be a real increasing number of people like yourself who are willing to share their education and their knowledge and their experience to help those people along the way.
Well, you know what? I love it. I mean, it's when I get phone calls or emails or text messages or Facebook messages from people all the time that tell me that they heard something I said when I was at a speaking engagement, or they read something I posted, or they listened to a podcast that made a difference in their lives. And for me, like that means a lot to me. It makes it. I mean, that's why I'm doing this. If there's people that listen to this and they find one thing from it that can help them with their life or their business, then that makes this time well worth it for me. So I enjoy it. I just enjoy helping people. I have enough And, it's like, if I get another 100 houses, I'm not going to be any happier than I am now. But I know that if I can help another 100 people, I will be happier than I am now. So that's my philosophy.
Let's talk about how you went from that first rental property to all of a sudden you had 10. You made it sound like it just happened overnight, but now you have 100. So I'd like to kind of go through that progression. You went from 1 to 10.
Sure.
It sounds like relatively quickly.
Yeah, it's the 1 to 10 was probably like the first 18 months. At the time, I wasn't aware of hard money or the Burr method or any of that stuff. At the time, you could put 10% down and pay your closing costs and buy a rental property. And I was pretty aggressive with it. In the IT field that I was in, I was a Microsoft certified trainer, and I was teaching these Microsoft certified systems engineer classes and A+ and Net+ and other courses like that. And I was like way overpaid, and I knew that. I was making $100 an hour teaching at colleges, mostly 9-credit stuff, but they were paying me $100 an hour to do it. And I knew that it wasn't going to last forever. I didn't know how long it was going to last, but I just knew that this was like a glitch in the market, and that as more people found out about this training, more people were going to, it's the supply and demand, more trainers would start doing it. And eventually there would be more people that have been certified than there are jobs available. And I was kind of looking into the future, and I saw that happening. And I thought, man, I really got to put my foot on the gas pedal with this rental business, because I don't know how long this is going to last. And right now I can't afford an $80,000 a year pay cut. So I was really motivated more than a lot of people would be. It was out of fear. I mean, I bought the rental properties out of fear that I was going to lose my job or get hurt or something like that, or worse, and my wife and my son weren't going to be able to pay the bills. So I was driven out of fear to buy rental properties at a really fast pace. And
did that fear lead to any mistakes? Now, I know you don't make mistakes, but did that fear push you to go too fast, or do you feel like maybe you didn't go fast enough?
No, I didn't. No, I wanted a pace that was comfortable for me, and the only mistake that I made, if I made any, and it's again based on the information at the time, it wasn't a mistake, is when the market crashed, I should have started gobbling up properties a lot faster. But I had the same fear that everybody else did. It's like, when is it going to hit the bottom? And of course, you don't know it hit the bottom until it's on the way back up. And it's the same with the top. You don't know when we're at the top of the market until it starts going back down. And then you look backwards and say, man, that was the top of the market. Yeah. So like right now, if the economy did like what it did in 2007, 2008, I wouldn't stop buying. I think that the mistake that I made was I should have just kept buying properties based on cash flow, not on appreciation or depreciation. If I can buy a house for $70,000 that rents out for $1,300 a month, and I'm making $400 a month off that house, if the house is worth $10,000 less next year, who cares? If I'm going to keep the house for 15 years, I don't care about any of that stuff. And if it appreciates, 25%, I don't care about that either, because I'm not going to sell the house. Cash flow is always the most important thing to me. The cash flow is what is going to take care of your turnovers. It's what's going to take care of putting food on your table. It's going to take care of repairs while the tenants are in there. If people that buy properties that don't cash flow, in my mind, are setting themselves up for some hardship in the future.
At what point did you acquire enough cash flow in properties to make that fear go away?
It was kind of a weird thing the way it worked out. My wife she went back to school, and she was going to get her degree so she could become a registered nurse. And around 2005, 2006, in that range, I'd gotten to the point where I was making $150 in my IT business, and I was making about $50 off of my rentals. And it was finishing up school, and she already had a job offer where she was going to start right out of the gate at around $52,000 a year. So I'm looking at the numbers, and I'm like, okay, $50,000 for my rentals. She's going to make $50. That's $100. So I just need to make another $50,000 a year to maintain the same income. And I thought, I'm going to quit this job, and I could haul trash and make $50,000 a year. It doesn't matter what. I just wanted to get out of that thing where I'm wearing a tie and like all that stuff. I just wanted to kind of be able to do my own thing. And at the same time, I met a guy that was wholesaling properties full time, and I knew what wholesaling was, but I had never done any wholesale deals. And I came up to the guy and I asked him, I said, listen, would you be interested in partnering on the wholesaling. I know you're already doing it. I've got a different set of contacts. I've got a different kind of experience. I'm driving around, like looking at the houses and how to do estimates and how to do all this. And he agreed to do that. And that's when I quit my job. It was a couple months, maybe 3 months before my wife started her job. Still had some money in the bank. And I quit. And then I started wholesaling with this guy. And it was a funny thing because, again, it was one of these market things where around 2005, 2006, 2007, the market was growing so fast that anybody could wholesale and make a lot of money. And I was one of those people. I didn't have any special skill or anything, but I started wholesaling with this guy, and I made more money the first year than I did the last year of my IT. I made well over $150,000 wholesaling, sitting in my house most of the time. And if there's been any secret to my success, I would say that secret is always looking around for opportunities. And then when you identify one, like, jump on it. Like, don't just sit around waiting. Like, you got to be decisive when you recognize that. And I did it with the IT. My income doubled in IT in 18 months because I saw opportunities and I jumped on them. With wholesaling, I saw that as an opportunity. I saw what this guy was doing and others. I jumped on that opportunity. And once I did that and my wife started working, we were making more money, almost probably twice what we were making when I was working. And I just kept buying properties. And when the market, there was a time where I was just looking for 10-unit apartment buildings, 10 units and up that needed renovation. That was really what I was looking for. But those properties are hard to find. It's like I was finding like one a year. And in the meantime, I've got friends that are like just killing it buying single-family houses. And after a few years of just buying larger apartment buildings, I went back to just buying the single-family houses. I just told you a lot of stuff, man. You want to stop?
No, this is great. It's that knowing that trajectory is important. How many houses did you have, or how many units did you have before you did quit your job?
Man, I would guess. It's because I didn't document any of this. I wish I knew Gary V back then because I would have documented everything. Probably had like maybe 30 units.
Okay, so you got up to 30 units. Because that's a big question. A lot of people will say, well, how many units or properties do I have to have before I can quit my job? So it sounds like you had 30 and you were making about $50,000 a year off of them.
Yeah, that's kind of a loaded question because, the question is, if you live in San Francisco, you're obviously going to need to make a lot more money than if you live in Baltimore. Yeah. Of course, if you're buying rentals in San Francisco, you're going to have to buy 1 million of them because none of them are going to cash flow. Unless you're paying cash for them. So it's really, there's no set number of units because it depends on, are you putting 10% down or are you going to pay 100% cash for them? Do you need to make $50,000 a year? Do you need to make $200,000 a year? So those are something that are very specific individual type goals.
Yeah. Well, it is interesting that with your formula, you needed to get 30 units, give or take, before you could get $50,000 a year in income. A lot of people would say, well, gosh, 30 units, that's a lot. How am I ever going to manage all that? So how did you manage all that?
Well, it's funny because I still manage my own units. How do I put this? I'm generally, this is going to sound probably like, I don't know, contrary to what you might think, but I'm pretty much like a lazy guy. And so I'm always looking for ways to get other people to do things or to get it so that it's automatically happens. And typically, after you get 15 units, managing 15 units in a full-time job is going to be quite a chore. I managed to do it. I just figured it out. I put stuff on auto pay as much as I could. I hired a full-time handyman. I guess around 20, 25 units, I hired a full-time guy to take care of the stuff that I didn't have the time to take care of. But by doing that, it's kind of tough because you're going to take a $30,000 pay cut, but that $30,000 pay cut is going to enable you to, gain an additional $40,000 in income because you're able to buy more units. If there's any hump in this business that's the hardest for people, if you're going to self-manage your units, there's going to come a time where you have to hire somebody. And that's the hardest. That's probably the hardest part of the business that I had to deal with was getting to that. It's like, okay, I got so many units now that it's getting difficult for me to take care of all this stuff. If a tenant gets locked out, or a toilet's clogged, or whatever it is, so I had to hire somebody to do it. And but again, by doing that, it freed up so much of my time that I was able to really scale my business a lot more after that.
You were able to scale your business. Where are you today with the number of units and your comfort level with how much you're making and all that?
Yeah, I'm comfortable where I'm at right now. I'm still buying properties. Mostly, I've got 5 guys that work for me full time now, and I'm buying properties that I don't necessarily want, but I want to keep my guys busy. So I'm buying, houses that need a significant amount of work. As far as the number of units go, it's hard to say because, do you include commercial? Do you include garages? I've got a partner where him and I own, I think 14 or 15 units together. So if I exclude my partner, I think I have 97, 98 units. And if I do include him, then do I get half of the 14 or 15 we own? Or, I don't know how people categorize it. So I just say it's around 100, somewhere in that range. But some of those units, though, let me just explain this. I have one apartment building that has 18 apartments and 9 garages. I've got another 15 unit, a 14 unit, a 13 unit. So even though it's a lot of units, if I get an 18 unit building, there's only one water line coming in. There's only one roof. It's a big roof, but there's only one roof. As far as maintenance goes, it's a lot easier. It's a lot more efficient. I would rather have 18 apartments to manage than 18 houses spread around the city from an efficiency standpoint. But the truth is that houses, dollar for dollar, make more money than apartments do. And you're probably not going to know a lot of people that have heard that before, but it's true because a lot of people are selling these apartment building courses and, come out and spend $5,000 and listen to my weekend thing and go buy a 50 unit apartment complex. But the truth is that apartment buildings are dollar for dollar, you make less for a couple of reasons. One is because the turnover rate is much higher. I get people my typical tenant that rents a house is going to be there 6 or 7 years. An apartment, 2 years. So you're going to have 3 turnovers in that 6 or 7 years where the house only turned over once. You're also going to need to come to the table with a lot more money. If you buy $1 million apartment building and you go the regular commercial financing route, you're going to have to come to the table with 25%, which is $250,000, and your closing costs may exceed $50,000. There's not a lot of people out there that have $300,000 laying around to go buy a building. I've done the Burr method with most of the apartment buildings that I own, where I bought them vacant, renovated them, rented them out, refied out, and paid my hard money lenders back. But those are really hard to find too. And but most of the buildings that I got, that's the way I did it. Did I answer your question yet? I could go on all day.
Yeah, you answered my question, and you brought up kind of a good conversation piece because, everything you said about why single families can be better and more profitable than apartments, I think is true. But I would just counter that by saying 2 things. One is, if you have a vacancy at your single family rental, then you're 100% unoccupied, and your vacancy is 0. At an apartment, you have the other units that are picking up the slack. But the real thing about apartment investing that makes it more lucrative, in my opinion, is that you can add value, and you're valuing it based on the net operating income. So the more income you can create and expenses that you can decrease, the more value you're adding. So the real profit to be made in commercial apartments and multifamilies is in the forced appreciation.
Well, the same thing applies to houses.
How so? Because residential properties are going to be valued based on the comparable method. So you're kind of bound to what all the other houses in your neighborhood are worth.
No, that's true. But if you like, I do the Burr on most of my stuff. If I have a property that's got an ARV of 100,000 and I buy it for 50 and put 20 in it, I've got $30,000 equity potentially. And I know these are round numbers. I'm not trying to sound like one of these HGTV clowns. Those are just very rough numbers. I'm not including, holding costs and all that stuff, but I'm just the very rough numbers. You're going to create a bunch of equity by, adding value to that property. Same as with an apartment building. You can go buy an apartment building and replace some of the carpet, put some laundry machines in, put some bushes out front, put a sign out front to give it a name. Just by giving the building a name, you add value to it. And you can create some equity like that. Or you can do the same thing with single family houses. the thing with single family, and again, the single family houses have a lot less turnover than the apartments do. So you're going to lose a lot of money because you're going to be, how the apartments are going to sit vacant for 1, 2, 3 months. You're going to have to get them and paint them again, maybe, change the countertop, like all that type of stuff. But there's another factor in it. It's not necessarily a financial factor, but it's a human factor. And that is when you have apartment buildings, you'll have a bunch of tenants complaining about all the other tenants. If a tenant in one apartment gets roaches, now you're treating 15 apartments for roaches. If it's a house that gets roaches, then it's not that big of a deal. If you get a tenant that turns out to be a really bad tenant, like a drug addict or something like that, they're going to disturb all the other tenants in the building. If it's a single family house, you're not going to have that issue. I get phone calls from my apartment buildings where people complain somebody leaves their stinky shoes in the hallway. Or that people don't. I got a call this morning from a tenant complaining about another tenant that doesn't throw their trash all the way in the dumpster. And you don't have to deal with that with the single family houses. Plus, there's a lot more of them. Single family houses, you use the example like, well, if you get one house and it goes vacant, you're at 100%, vacancy rate. Well, I wouldn't buy one house. I would buy 10. If I can get a 10-unit apartment building or a 10-unit house over the long run, the 10 houses are going to have a higher cash flow than the apartments are.
So you own both. You own the multifamily and the single families. It sounds like you much prefer the single families.
Yeah, it's a funny thing because the majority of the units that I have are in apartment buildings. And the thing that I got from those is a ton of equity. That's where, you buy houses and you're thinking, okay, I get $20,000, $30,000 in equity. In the apartment buildings, I've gotten $300,000, $400,000 in equity. And with no money out of my pocket, by the way, because I have very good relationships with some hard money lenders that will, I could literally make a phone call and say, hey, I want to buy a 15-unit building and I need $700,000, and I'll get an approval in 5 minutes. That isn't something that I would recommend everybody try. You have to build those relationships up, which is something that I speak about frequently, just the importance of that, and paying people on time. And I can talk about that too if you want. But as far as like the differences between single families and apartments, man, what's the best thing to do is what you want to do. We can analyze it and say, well, some people say, well, the best thing is where you make the most money. And some people are going to say, well, the best way is where I get the least phone calls. And both ways are right. It's people should invest on their own comfort level and their own expectations. And I wouldn't say somebody's wrong because they don't do it my way. I would say that they're doing it the way they want to do it. Yeah. The long run, we'll see if they're successful in the long run. But I don't have the a monopoly on the right way of investing.
Okay, so given all that, what's your goals for the future then? I mean, it sounds like you've reached a great place with your portfolio. Where do you go from here?
Man, that's a freaking hell of a question, because I ask myself that like just about every day, like what I want to do next. And I don't really want to buy any more properties. I make enough money. If I make more money, I'm not going to be much happier. I might even be less happier if I have more apartments or houses because maybe I make $10,000 more per year because I bought a few houses, and you think, okay, I'll be happier with $10,000 more dollars, but then the headaches that it adds to your life might be greater than the happiness that you get from having more money. So for me, as far as what the future goes, I've got some other stuff that I'm doing right now, some other income producing assets that I'm developing. I started a website for hard money lenders where I'm actually brokering hard money loans. That's going well. I have an app that's being developed right now for wholesalers. It's kind of like a Tinder for wholesalers. That should be hitting the market in a couple months. And in my future, I've been in this business almost 18 years. I see myself like starting to liquidate in a few years, maybe 3 or 4 years, maybe selling half, 3/4 of my portfolio. The goal is I want to have a certain amount in the bank. I want to make $15,000 to $20,000 a month off some houses owned free and clear. And my wife and I bought a condominium in the Cayman Islands. We're going to buy another house in Florida in a few years. And, the goal is 5 years from now, we want to stay in Cayman for 4 months a year, stay in Florida 4 months a year, and then just kind of bum around the rest of the planet the other 4 months.
Now, are you also coaching? And I know you speak at meetup groups and you have some training classes. Do you also coach?
Yeah, I do coach. It's not something like I don't advertise it or anything. It's like people, I'm more interested in the people that are looking for me. I don't want to go out and try to sell my coaching program to anybody or anything like that. So I don't ever do any of those like free weekend seminars where you show up and then I sell you a bunch of crap, or any of those things where it's like $97 for the day, and then the whole thing turns into a pitch fest where I try to sell you some other, try to take more of your money from you. I don't do any of that. I really prefer the one-day events where I just go in, people pay me for the day, and I tell them everything I can possibly tell them without, trying to upsell, anything else to them.
You speak to a lot of groups. You talk to a lot of other investors. We began our conversation talking about that combination of brains and guts. I'm wondering if you can kind of give us an idea of what it is that has made you successful, or that you think has made you successful, where other people are not as successful.
Okay, that's a good question, and I think that's probably one of the most important things that I can talk about today. I think some of the things that have made me successful are paying really close attention to my numbers, not buying bad deals. And here's what I mean by that. Or I've had friends that do this, and I warn them, and they don't listen, and then they fail. People will say, I got to buy 5 houses by the end of this year. When you do that, then you set yourself up to buy bad deals just so you buy 5 houses. My goal is I want to buy another good house. I just look at each house one at a time. I might say, man, I'd like to buy a few houses this year, but I don't base my purchases on, I got to get that few houses. I just look for the next good deal. And if it's not a good deal, I don't buy it. So I make sure every deal is a good deal, every single one. Some of the other things that are really important are your reputation. In this business, it's everybody knows everybody. At least, Baltimore's got, over 1 million people in the metro area. And, it's a very small town like that. And, you need to do what you say you're going to do. And you need to treat people decent. Don't be one of the clowns and do a bunch of dumb stuff. If people know that you're good, people are going to want to do business with you. I'll give you a great example of that. This is one of these weirdest things that's ever happened to me. So I got this company, this guy, he does my appliance repairs. If a tenant calls and says the stove's broke, he'll go fix it. And sometimes, he sells used appliances. Occasionally I'll buy an appliance from him. And he calls me up one day and he asked me if I'd got to lunch with him. So I'm like, sure, why not? I mean, doesn't everybody want to get to lunch with their appliance repair guy? So I got to lunch with him, and I'm sitting down and we're talking. He says, well, Mark, I'm selling my business January 1st. I'm like, oh, that's great. Good for you. And he's like, yeah, my son's buying it. It's like, okay. He's like, so I'm going to have $1 million on January 1st. Do you want to borrow it? And I'm like, and I'm thinking there, I'm kind of stunned, I'm like, man, I'm going to start fixing refrigerators. This guy's going to have $1 million on January 1st, And then I'm thinking, why the hell is he calling me? He hardly knows me. So I asked him, I said, I'm just curious, why'd you call me about this? And his response was, well, your tenants were your reference. And of course I'm looking at him like, all right, this is going to be good. I said, what do you mean? He says, well, every time, one of your tenants calls, about, the fridge isn't working or something like that, your tenants always speak very highly of you. And that contrasts with many of the tenants that call from other landlords, where the tenants are like, man, my landlord, he don't fix nothing. This stove, I hadn't had a stove that's worked in 6 months. He don't fix anything. The difference for me was my tenants spoke very highly of me, even when they were calling because something didn't work. And so him hearing that from my tenants repeatedly over the years gave him some kind of insight into the kind of person I am. And by doing that, he wanted me to, borrow his money. And of course I did borrow some of it, and I led him to some other good people that I know that borrowed the rest. And so the point is that, it's the golden rule thing. You treat people the way you want to be treated all the time, no exceptions. And more good people are going to want to do business with you. Same with, some other hard money lenders that I've borrowed from, where I mentioned before, where I could stand out in front of a building and call my lender up and say, look, I'd like to borrow $400,000 for this apartment building. What do you need? And he said, well, I'll call you back in 5 minutes. And he called me back and said, you got the money. He didn't even know the address to the building, but it was just based on my reputation. I'd borrowed money from him before. And when I first started borrowing money from the guy, on the first of the month, I didn't mail him a check. I went to his office. The guy was a title attorney. And I went to his office, and the lady at the desk is like, can I help you? And I was like, yeah, I'm here to see Jim. And she's like, is he expecting you? And I said, well, he's not expecting me, but he'll be happy to see me. And he comes out, and I'm like, hey, Jim, my name's Mark Owens, and, you owe a hard money payment, and I wanted to, drop it off. And I did that every month on the 1st. I wanted to build a relationship with this guy. I just didn't want to just be some guy that mailed him a check. I wanted him to know me. If he saw me in the grocery store or Home Depot, he knew who I was. And by building that kind of relationship, it got to the point where I could call him up and, tell him I needed to borrow money for a building, and I would get it without any questions asked. So those are some of the things that your reputation and just building a great network is another thing that's really helped me with my business and everything else in my life. That's great. I love that. Thanks for sharing those details. How would someone get a hold of you or at least find out more about you? The easiest way is probably, I got a Facebook page. It's just called Mark Owens, REI. Or, I got an email address, mark@markowens.com. Those are probably the easiest ways. Well, Mark, it's been a real pleasure talking with you, and I think it's helpful to hear how you went from buying one single-family rental property to all of a sudden having 10, being able to get to that financial, I don't know if it's necessarily financial freedom, but that place where you don't have that financial fear any longer. Yeah, it's financial freedom. It still takes work. I still work a few hours a day, but the truth is I could sell everything I own, pay everybody I owe, and I could live another 100 years without having to work. So I do have the financial freedom, but I enjoy what I do. I enjoy interacting with the guys that work for me. I enjoy, most of my tenants are, wonderful, decent people. I enjoy, talking to them and seeing them progress through their lives, with, different things, kids graduating school and, all that stuff. It's just fun to see that type of stuff. So, yeah, but it's a great business. I'm just telling you, I don't know anything else that is a more surefire way to improve your financial independence than real estate is. If you do it smart and you do it right and you buy it for cash flow, I don't know of a better way. I've been thinking about it for 15 years. What else can I do? And I sit down and I write down the things that that are important to me. And nothing beats real estate, not even close. I agree, and I really want to thank you for taking the time to tell us all about it and share your thought process. It's been informative. You're absolutely welcome. I want to thank everybody for listening to this episode. I'm your host, Brian Hamrick from Hamrick Investment Group, and you can find out more about me by going to higinvestor.com. That's higinvestor.com. And you can also ask questions and join us on Facebook by going to RPOA, Rental Property Owner and Real Estate Investor Podcast. This episode was sponsored by Green Property Management, managing everything from single-family homes to apartment complexes in the West Michigan area. Find out more at greenpropertymgt.com.
You've been listening to the Rental Property Owner and Real Estate Investor Podcast, brought to you by the Rental Property Owner Association. You can find out more at rpoaonline.org. If you enjoyed this podcast, please go to iTunes to subscribe, rate, and review.